all of you being here. We're going to go ahead and going to be recording today. So let's see, pop-up is too small. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and get started with our friends on Facebook as well. And very excited to be able to do that today. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to say hello and welcome to everybody. I am Amy Robinson. I'm the founder of NEXXT, and we are beyond thrilled to have you here today for the launch of our Next Up conversation series called Perspectives. Today we are in webinar format, and we will be recording so that you can see it again or share it if you're joining us via Facebook Live. Hello, and please post any questions, comments, or anything you have in the comments. While I cannot see you, well, we can't see you, we know that you're here, so please feel free to say hello to us. We also want all of your questions and comments and encourage you to continue to use chat, questions, Q&A, all of the things that we know how to do in the Zoom world now. Or we would love to hear from you live. So if you are in the webinar with us and you'd like to raise your hand, use the raise your hand feature next to your name under participants, we can unmute you so we can hear your beautiful voice. And finally, please send a message to all panelists if we cannot see your full name. And thank you for being here. And we also want to know who you are so that we can send you a survey, because we are growing this community into what you want it to be. So I'm hoping that you found this Next Up conversation because you either follow us on social media or because you've joined our community and you receive our Next News emails. Those Next News emails will become more and more important as to where you get our exclusive content, like the recording of today's conversation. So please go to our website, nexxtwomen.com, nexxtwomen.com to join. It's from our homepage. And in case you are new to NEXXT, we are a worldwide catalyst community for women. We are here to get you from where you are to where you want to be, and we're doing it as a community of women supporting women. We want to motivate you, educate, inspire, and support you toward whatever is next for you. In addition to these kinds of Next Up conversations, we have a coaching group programs that are designed and facilitated by me, and you can find those at our website as well. We have groups starting in the fall, so be sure to check that out. And you can find more about us, anything, follow us on social media, all of the platforms by searching NEXXT Women, and that's NEXXT with NEXXT, 2 X's. So now I don't want to take up any more of our time. I want to say hello to our panel. So please join me in welcoming them. I want to say hello to Hannah. Wave, Hannah. Marie. Hello, Marie. Jeanette. And Sylvia. Yay. We're going to learn about you through your stories that you share today. So I don't want to take up any of our precious time with bios about what you do, because it's only the tip of the iceberg in who you are. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of a go round, and I would love to hear a little bit about you. I'd love to hear about your family, maybe your cultural background, and probably most of all, I want to know what compelled you to step up to this not so small conversation today. We're going to start with you, Hannah. Hi.
Hi. Okay. So yeah, I'm Hannah. I just graduated from the University of Arkansas with my Bachelor of Arts in Journalism with a concentration in Advertising and Public Relations. Such a long degree name, but I got it. It's done. Diploma is in the mail, and I stepped up. I work for Concord Adams, a marketing firm here in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I work very closely with NEXXT Women, helping them with their marketing on social media, and in developing these conversations, which we have about once a month. We were just talking about important things going on, and I defended my thesis right before graduation at the very beginning of Asian American Heritage Month about Asian representation, and it was just all kind of coming together at a time where, like, politically also, and the environment of what was happening to Asian Americans in the United States was very chaotic. And so I'm here to talk about it because I wish I had been able to sit in on conversations like these when I was younger, like as a teenager, as I was developing this identity. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, let's just put it out there. Hannah was the inspiration for this conversation, to be honest. And I really appreciate her putting herself out there. And she's been so eloquent in talking about it and educating me about it. And I was just like, everybody needs to have this conversation. And I realized that a lot of women in my life, I didn't even realize were having the experiences that she was putting out there. And so I think a lot of us have people and women in our lives that we don't know the stories of everything that's happening. So thank you very much for inspiring us. I appreciate it. Hey, proud mama, Marie. Marie, you are this lovely lady's mother, and I would just I can imagine how proud you are of her, and I'd just love to know a little bit about of your family. Obviously you've done a great job, and what you've been thinking about the journey that she's been on, and maybe even what she's been taking you through in the context of that.
Well, and as you said, I'm Hannah's mom. I'm Marie, and I am Chinese, and I always call myself 1.5 generations. My dad came over when he was a little boy, and my mother was born in the States. Her mother came over from China. So I'm truly American, but my heritage is Chinese. And when Hannah told me about what she was doing her thesis on, we've talked about things like this before, probably not as much as she would have liked, but I would explain to her some of the things that we would go through, or things that I would go through when I was growing up. And then we had a family friend who passed away, and my mother told us about some of the challenges that she had when she was growing up in a community where she was the minority, and some of the situations that she was put in that she had to deal with that we weren't aware of, that she had never told us before. So I think it kind of helped Hannah with her paper. So I'm just here to share whatever I can.
That's awesome. Family is wonderful. And especially we don't tell enough stories. Sylvia, I know that you come from a big connected family, and I know that this is not something that gets talked about every day. And so I'd love to know, in the context of all of that, like, big step up into having this conversation. And I'd love to know what inspires you and what inspired you to be here.
Hi, I'm Sylvia. I'm from Arkansas, born and raised, first generation Asian American. My parents are refugees from Vietnam. They came over after the war. And so my cultural lens and how I grew up is through that and through their journey, and having understood and learned about their lives, my entire family's lives, and what it took to get over to America when they escaped. And so that's always kind of in the back of my head, and a lens I pretty much do everything through. You know, when all in the past year, it's been pretty difficult, right, with the attacks, and especially in the Asian American community. And we'll probably get into it, but you know, we've always just been silent and never said anything. And I think recently, when Atlanta and the shootings happened, it kind of pushed me to at least speak out, even on my own social media platform, where it's just my friends, right? But outside of that, I've never really talked about my experience. I've been involved in a lot of multicultural events and organizations, and sharing culture like in a much more positive light than necessarily digging deep into like issues and challenges, though. And so I'm very grateful, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to kind of be here and like share this moment with some great women,
Yes, and great women indeed, including Jeanette Balleza Collins. Thank you so much for being here. I know that you have a connected and robust family as well, and you're growing your family, and you're just a a powerhouse in your community, and you've risen to the top and overcome a lot of challenges. You're at the top of your game. No, I'm just kidding. So much. And I'm just curious about your experiences in your career, and through the lens of your family, and why you're here today.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and just listening to you both, like I'm kind of getting teary-eyed, just like the
I know.
mother-daughter connection. And then
I know.
Sylvia, you finding your voice. I mean, I resonate so much with so much of what you guys are saying. So that's a big piece, because there's just a lot of healing about being in conversations like this with people with shared experiences. And I think that's what we're all coming to learn by necessity in terms of our own self-care and staying sane in current days. But I'm Filipino American, born and raised in Arkansas. My dad came from a family of 13. The vast majority of my family on his side are in California. So we are kind of these outliers. And in Arkansas, my mom's family is also in California, a different part of California, and then also in the Philippines. So I mean, of course, we've got on my dad's side in the Philippines as well. But I grew up in Little Rock. Arkansas Filipino Association was very surrounded by a big group of people who shared my heritage. And so I was very lucky to be around a lot of people who were experiencing that as well. A lot of the nurses that you find in Arkansas are immigrants from the Philippines. And I also grew up, my best friend was Chinese American, my other best friend was Indian American. And so, oftentimes when you go to college and you see a lot of the foreign exchange students that congregate together, I think a lot of that happened as I was growing up too. I was drawn to other girls my age who had a common, different language spoken in the household, and kind of navigating things with one foot in one world and one foot in the other. And so, yeah, everything about this conversation, I felt like has been in line with what's been on my mind. And so I'm just very thrilled to be a part of this. Thank you.
Well, absolutely. I'd love to build on that just a little bit about, what are about some of the things that you learned from your family about your collective history or culture, and kind of how or if you did or didn't kind of live that or gravitate through that, and kind of how that how you found that valuable or useful in your journey, and identity, and navigating some of those things. So I don't know if Hannah or Sylvia or Marie, if you had some similar experiences. I'm just going to point out, not because of age, but you are all from different, you're all in different decades of your life. And I think that that's really important, because, and something to talk about, because, something that Hannah may be experiencing, obviously, Marie, you didn't experience, or maybe you wished that you had experienced, and hope that Hannah will be able to experience. But I'm really interested about, family and the community that you are around, and how your history or culture either was very useful, or you found some communities to kind of bolster you when in doubt or when in question. So anybody?
I'll start. Mom said something about like, oh, we probably didn't talk about it as much as we'd like, which I don't want you to feel like that, because we did talk about it a lot. But the other thing that talking about, like, we're not our jobs, we're not our labels, like labels help describe us, but that's not all that we are. And I really cherish like all the stories that you would tell me and Haley about like you just living your life, and it wasn't like marred by like racist experiences that you might have had. And I feel like growing up in a time that's supposed to be like more progressive, anytime like some sort of aggression is like made against me, I'm always like so taken aback. And I mean, my mom can attest, I talk so much. And I'm always like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. Blah, 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 like on. And it makes me like upset. And then I have to step back, like following your example. I'm like, okay, I can channel these feelings of like being hurt or upset into like more productive outlets, whether it's education or just sharing my experiences with like maybe my mom. I'm gonna be like, Mom, can you believe this happened to me? And she's like, oh, right, you know? Or, and I just have to remind myself that it's like, I can just be like an adult woman in the United States, like just doing whatever I want, working, being a good friend, being in a sorority, whatever it is, without being like taught, like married to like, oh, but I'm Asian, because I am and I'm proud of it. But it's also like, yeah, I learned that from my mom. And I, at the same time, like talking to my grandmother, I would argue like a little bit more, oh, we're Chinese. I would show her pictures from girls from school and I'm like, look at this, my classmate. Like I have an Asian classmate. And she's like, last name, Northern Chinese. We're Southern Chinese. And I'm like, okay, I didn't know that, but cool. You know what I mean? And so it's like learning that aspect too. And like, that's great. And so generationally getting back to family, like I've learned to marry those two things and learn how to be myself, but also be proud of like what my heritage is. So
I feel like there's a huge Marie. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say,
Yeah.
Hannah, because as you said, we are at different generations here on the panel, and Hannah's right. Because my mom's 90 and almost 90, she'll be 90 in September, and she's of what we would call old school, very, very old school Chinese culture. So Hannah gets exposed to both that and then the way I was raised. And the interesting thing is, unlike Jeanette, I grew up in Little Rock, North Little Rock. And I lived there until I moved to Texas for my job. And we were the only Chinese family around. And the only friends that we had that were of any Asian descent were down in Southeast Arkansas, where my dad had grown up once he came over to the States. And so my parents, though, is really funny. It was a kind of a mix of the Chinese culture and the American culture, is that they raised us to be very independent. My dad used to say, I feel sorry for the man who marries you because you're going to be just like the boys, my two brothers, is because very independent, stand up for what you believe in. You're not going to kowtow to anybody, you're going to be your own person. But yet the Chinese culture was very strong, and they raised me so well in the belief of you can be your own person and you will take charge and stand up what you believe in, that when my dad sometimes would fall back into the old Asian culture and, the man does this, and it's like, oh, no, wait, you said that I was going to be just like the boys. So you can't tell me I can't do this, or you can't tell me I can't do that. So it was a combination. Sometimes a strange combination, because sometimes they warred with each other. But so Hannah got to see a little bit of that. And then she hears a lot about when my mother grew up. So it was very different. When my mom was in the States, it was very different during that time frame, because they really isolated the Asian communities and they weren't allowed to mix with the Caucasian communities. So it was a little bit more of a challenge. My parents did everything they could to make sure that didn't happen with us when we were growing up. So, yeah.
Well, and I think that's the theme. I mean, Hannah, when you were talking about your mom, it's just like the reason you can call things out is because her mom raised her in a safer environment. She raised you in a safer environment. And I see that theme generationally in my family too. It's just like each generation tries to, control the environment to which they can based on whatever resources they have to make it safer. And then because we had the safety they didn't have, we can explore things differently. But then we don't feel like we can relate as much anymore. And then that makes us a little bit more somber. And so it really is, it's a journey. Anyway, I love hearing from both of you.
No. Sylvia, what about you and relatable experiences and
I
stories
mean,
right there?
absolutely. And it's so interesting when Marie's talking about the different generations there. So I'm first generation here. Again, my family are refugees, but internally, I was also raised by very, very independent, maybe even stubborn women, right? And so which is so interesting because in traditional Vietnamese culture, it's very much like the Chinese in that, there's a certain social construct. Women are supposed to do certain things, men, and etc. And what's interesting is in my family, so my great grandmother, like this is a story my mom always shares, is that my great grandmother, she had asked her father to be able to go to school. Girls weren't necessarily allowed to go to school. She asked her father to go to school, and his response was, "Why? You wanted to learn how to write love letters to boys. There's no like point for you to go to school." Right. And then from then on, she taught then her 9, 10, however many kids, especially the women, they were like, "You're going to get an education." And now we have journalists and stuff. And even in that generation, my great grandmother's kids, my grandmother's side, and that just continued to pass down. And but especially it's that education piece that really got passed down, is that no matter where we came from, we came from poverty, in Vietnam, and made that harrowing escape, but you can get out of it in this free country with education. And so and just like Marie said, they created a monster, right? So as much as they want us to be independent and educated, right? It's like, okay, well then you're gonna get an argument. Then we're gonna have a discussion about certain issues where you may be a little more traditional in that aspect or whatever it is. And so I totally relate there. I think that's it's kind of funny.
Well, and it's Marie was talking about, let's say it's that like they pushed for all of that, but there's a falling back into cultural patterns or habits or any of those other things, because that's what and it's and pushing the comfort zone constantly, especially generation after generation after generation, and expanding it a little bit more and more. I've heard one of the things that Hannah was saying, and I'd love to hear about this, is, and all of you were talking about, like, part of progression is to focus on the positive, right? And focus on what is being accomplished, and focus on while blatant segregation and bias was happening the entire time. And so you get to Hannah's generation where, where the bias and hatred shocks her, and the comments shock her, and it makes, and this happens a lot in a lot of other contexts too, like sexual harassment and others, where it's like, did I just hear that? I mean, didn't we just fight to get to a different place, and aren't we in a different place? And so we kind of think we're crazy, right? We're like, did that just happen? And then we don't know how to respond to it as well. And so I think the value in kind of saying this is happening, and these are the things that I experienced, is that other Asian women, when that happens to them, will be like, oh, okay, so I didn't mishear that. There really is bias, there really is stigma, and that we are not very far away from literal concentration camps in our country. And we've come through that. And so the balance, I'm curious about what you feel like maybe the balance between addressing it directly and also seeing where the progress has happened, and continuing it in your own families and lives. I'm curious what that balance is, the only word that I can think of for that, especially at this point in time where we have a huge opportunity to really call it like we see it.
Well, I think one thing is that we have to make sure that we say something. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
No, that's good. It's good. That's why we're here.
Mom, if it makes you feel better, Amy cried when I was talking, and like the other day.
And I'm gonna do it again.
So
I mean, I feel like all the waterworks are just right there.
Right there.
You know, in some ways, luckily Hannah didn't have as much of a bias that I did when I was growing up. But I think, and hopefully, her dad and I raised her to be strong. So if she comes across it, she's strong enough to stand up for herself. We still see it. Maybe not as much as I did. Unfortunately, lately, probably more than I had in the last 10 years or so. But that's the one thing I'm thankful that my mom raised me to be very strong. So if I see it, I don't shy away from it. There have been times when I've had to confront very obvious prejudice, and it's like, you're not going to treat me like that. I'm not going to stand for it. So if you don't want to treat me as your equal, then I'll go elsewhere. I'll go take my business elsewhere, whatever it may be. And if my parents hadn't have raised me to be so strong, I don't know that I would have done it.
I think my first like encounter with like someone like intentionally like overtly like saying something, because I got a lot of stuff as a kid where like I grew up in a really like white community, and so kids would say stuff and I'd be like, please don't say that again, and they're like, sorry, you know, like I dealt with that a lot, and I don't really begrudge people for that. But I was working at an ice cream place at home, and some guy made some like dumb joke, and it, like in front of customers, and so I was like really uncomfortable, and so I just helped the customers. And then in the back in the kitchen, like our boss was cooking and doing whatever he's doing, and I went back there and I like let him hear it. I was really calm about it, but I was like, that's not funny, this is why it's funny. If I made, he was Hispanic, and I was like, if I made a joke about that except role reversal, how would you feel? And he's like, I would probably be upset. And I was like, I like, whatever, I took care of it. And my boss, like after the shift, like pulled me aside before I went home and was like, you handled that so maturely for a 17-year-old. I'm like really glad I didn't have to get involved. Like obviously I would have, but you had it taken care of. And like, I really respect how eloquent you were. And I like was really pleased. Like the praise that I got was like, wow, yeah, like I handled it really well, because my mom, my dad like raised me. I would have stuff at school too. And I remember one time I came home upset, some kid said something to me, and my dad, who's Caucasian, was like, you have 24 hours to make sure it doesn't happen again, or like it or not, I will go to the like APs about it. And he's like, because people won't talk to you like that. He's like, so if you don't want me to get involved, shut it down. And if it doesn't shut down, I'm taking care of it. And I was like, okay. So like from both parents, like I was very much, I knew how to take care of myself. But that was also like, I came home and I was talking to my dad. I was like, I was at work. Like, these aren't kids at school. Like, I'm in a professional setting. And he's like, I'm sorry that happened to you, but you should ask your mom what she's dealt with. And I was like, oh. And it was really eye-opening for me, because naively I was like, oh, when there's no more high school bullies, I won't deal with this anymore. And very clearly I understood that that was not the case. But I only like, had it been like a few years prior, or had different parents raise me, maybe I probably would have cried. I was almost like, I was choked up when I realized like the joke that was being made was at my expense, because it made me uncomfortable, and I was in front of customers, and my gut instinct was to like walk out, but I had a job to do, and that ability to be able to like stay calm and handle it, I very much attribute to what my mom was saying about just generations of experience, but also my parents making sure that I was equipped with a way to confront it and not let people walk all over.
Sylvia and Jeanette, you're both nodding your head. Especially, I thought maybe at the comment about like high school bullies, maybe it'll end at that point and not out in my life and my professional world. You have any thoughts on that, Jeanette?
Well, I mean, I'm glad that you were equipped to be able to deal with that, especially in the professional environment. But I mean, I remember being on a walk with my best friend, who I told you is Chinese American, and we were in our neighborhood, and it was the first, there are some neighborhood kids, all of mixed races, and they all just started taunting us and, basically ching chong chang, all the things that you like are not expecting to hear like as you're walking down the street. And again, and I think that what was so crazy about that moment was, one, that we were just like elementary school kids, two, that these were all different races and different ages. And so I mean, that was what my college entry essay was about, that got me into Hendrix. I mean,
Really?
and that's the thing, is like you learn about taking those experiences. And this is what my parents were always like, you need to take what comes your way. And what you said, Marie, is like, my mom raised me to be strong. And I think that is like the recurring anthem for like every Asian mother that I hope that I am singing to my two kids. But I think just part of that resilience is like taking what comes your way, and I think it's hard to know what to do in the moment. And that's what I'm hoping to do for my kids, is to help them figure out. Because at that time I was just like jaw on the ground, and then my best friend was just like throwing the bird. Like she was just like very irate in the moment. She was like, no, this is not going to fly. But then once they started looking like they were going to chase us, I was like, let's go. And so, but those are moments that we have been best friends our entire lives. And I can count a number of times throughout our lives as we've grown up together that the same things have occurred. And it's funny, she was just visiting me not too long ago, and she, in her mind, she's like, I don't remember any of that. Because for her, that was the way she dealt with it. She was like, she experiences it, it doesn't serve me, done. And I wished that I was kind of wired more like that. But I have to ruminate on it and think about it and figure, and it doesn't, and I have to transform it into something that serves me, like that college essay. And I think that's the part, those are the skills that I'm trying to help raise my kids. And even because I think a lot of this is not just being Asian, but being first generation, and also being in the South, and like all of those things intermixed. It has only been now that I'm realizing how that's affected me in the way that I relate in my relationship, the way that I relate in work. I'm all about like, what are the rules, and like, how do I stay and abide by them and ask for permission? There are a lot of things I think that have kind of, and then my defense mechanism has always been like, I don't want to feel trapped. I want to find options. And so I'm always figuring out, like, thinking through all the scenarios and like, what are the options? Because I think what I've learned, and I think about 2 generations back, like my grandparents were running for their lives. I mean, Sylvia, they were running for their lives. And then for us to hear their experiences. And then of course, it's very easy to think, oh, well, nothing that I'm experiencing is worth complaining about it when you put our trauma next to their trauma. So learning to even respect like what we are feeling based on what we know, I think it's a difficult thing to figure out, and how to be respectful, but then of ourselves and of their context and their histories. And I think a big part of that is just spending more time and listening. And so a lot of my cousins, my grandma is gone now, but there have been so many, because she had so many grandchildren, like all of us at some point have like sat down, interviewed, like wrote down her stories. And so it's just, yeah, it's embedded in us. And of course, I'm in entrepreneurship. So when I think about the immigrants' experience, like the fearlessness, the courage, the uncertainty, all the things, all the grit that you have to have, I'm like, you guys were the OG entrepreneurs. I mean, all of that. So to me, that's the legacy I come from, and that's what I'm trying to pursue, because that is what I learned, and that's what they have proven over and over to us, even though they don't give themselves credit for that.
I love that you said respecting and honoring what you're experiencing and not comparing it to, well, they had it worse, and so this is better, and therefore diminishing what's happening. And I think that's huge. I love that you said that. Like, what about you, Sylvia? I know that you're like, I have 89 stories running through my head. Which one do I choose?
I'm like, yes, 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 yes. Like, there's so many things to like kind of tap into here. I mean, I really don't know where to start. I can tell you, I guess, in terms of what I have personally experienced, it's never ever been anything overtly racist, right? Like in what Hannah has experienced. But comments like I had from a teacher in school was, aren't Asians supposed to be quiet? Why aren't you as quiet? I'm a clown. I'm a class clown, and so I was always talking and always got in trouble for that. But that was it never sat well with me, but I never knew why. I was too young to really understand why. Comments like that were always made, but I never really thought they were racist. And which drove me into like the multicultural, recreational activities I was doing a lot. But my mom's generation, my goodness, like, I mean, my mom has shielded me from some of her stories, and some have come out now, and it just makes me feel so powerless. And, the Vietnamese refugee experience is different. Under the monolith of Asian American, there's very many different countries and cultures, and the Vietnamese refugee one is very different, and it's very different. A Vietnamese refugee experience in the South is very different from even West Coast, right? And whatever, but they dealt with a lot. And you talk about the strength and resilience and the grit, and it's the choice to just endure that and just be driven by the fact that, okay, well, but I need to do this for my family. So I have to keep pushing. Like, you just have to block that. And I can't say, at least my mom ever stood up for herself. So we talk with Lethan too, we talk about the strength piece, women were taught to be strong and independent. But in certain aspects, we still can't speak up for ourselves. There's this struggle between strength and, I guess, submissiveness. I don't know the lack of a better word, but it's so interesting because even when it came to the shootings in Atlanta, I was irate. And I told my mom, because this is the first time I've done this, because I still haven't been able to really find my voice in this area. And I told my mom, well, I posted some angry messages on Instagram, just letting people know how I feel. And she was like, why did you do that? You're going to lose your job. Like, you can't do that. Like, if the job sees that you did that, you can't do that. Don't say anything. We dealt with this forever. Why do you need to say anything? Right. And I was like, there's that creating the monster. You've taught us to be strong. We need to stand up for ourselves. This is wrong. Right. But, even in our daily lives, like, we still deal with, and Hannah spoke about this in the minute interview, the microaggressions. It is absolutely real. And I still deal with it every single day. I mean, and I think even Amy, you talked about, like, am I crazy that this is happening? But I'll be at a store in a cash registration line, and there's, Caucasian families and individuals going through. The attendant is, all happy, smiley, attitude, very great, whatever. And the second my family, we get there, there's not even a hello, no, how are you? Demeanor completely changes, scan, out the door. And that's small, right? This is not overtly racist. I've never known what to call it until recently, that it's microaggression.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we were never taught that. There wasn't a word for this, but I felt it all the time. And always thought I was crazy for feeling this. Never called it out because it was never overt. They didn't physically attack me, but they made me feel unwanted. They made me feel unwelcomed. And when you have that feeling over and over and over again for years and years and years, I mean, what are you supposed to do with that feeling? And like you're saying, Jeanette, for my parents' generation, okay, they turn that into work. They turn that into making sure that they put money and food on the table, right? Whereas like my generation or even Hannah's, it's like, okay, well, actually, we have platforms now and we can speak and we have a voice and we can say something without retribution and it's or retaliation. And so it's, but I'm still working through that. Like, it's not, I couldn't, I would have just been a ball crying, Hannah. There's no way I would have been as strong as you. Like, that's amazing. Cause I just could not have done that. And I'm still working on that.
Hannah, one of the things that you have mentioned and that you kind of learned through the process of writing your thesis is that we really are still developing language. You just mentioned like microaggression. Oh, I didn't know what to call that before. And Asian hate, stop Asian hate coming out as a hashtag. Even for me, I was like, hate. Oh, hate, really? Ow, that's a big one. But that's that calling it what it is and developing a language around it. In that mini interview, and I was messing up like East Asian, Pan Asian is, I don't know what all the words are, because the other part of, some of this, without going too in depth, is that even using Asian is a bucket, a really big bucket. You all are different, your families are from different countries. And you were talking, Marie, about how your mother was very, not just specifically China, but a region of China that was very important. I knew some people from Latin America and, the different places, Venezuela, I'm Venezuelan. And, and then even in the, Hispanic or Latin or Latinx now. And we've even had that around the African-American community and some pushback in that. So it's a developing language. And I'd really like to hear, Hannah, how you're seeing that developing and what you're kind of observing in that when you were writing your thesis and living your life.
Yeah, when the way the University of Arkansas does their honors program is that your only real parameters are that it is within your field of study for your degree program. And so the journalism department has 3 different concentrations, like news editorial, broadcast, like television, and advertising and media and like mass media. And so they were just like, make it related to like journalism, media kind of stuff. And I was like, God, that's huge. And so I was trying to figure out, I knew I wanted to do something about Asian representation. My grandparents really, 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 like, education was so important to them. And my grandma was like constantly talking about how proud she was that I was in the honors college. So like I carried that with me. And so I was like, I think I want to do Asian representation. And when I was a sophomore working on like my proposal, I was like, oh, we'll just do Asian representation. And as I got into it, I saw the word Pan-Asianism, and that was not a word I was familiar with. And I read a book about it and during my research. And I was like, oh, I can narrow down this topic a lot. And so my thesis topic changed 3 or 4 times. It just got more and more narrow. One, as like time constraints and like it being an undergraduate study, but 2, I was learning a lot specifically in language. And with research, language is really important because it specifies what exactly you're talking about. And I went home and I was like, this is what my thesis is. Have you heard the word Pan-Asianism? I haven't. And so I had a conversation with my mom. I was like, I read a book. Let me tell you about this book. And then microaggressions, I remember like last summer, I think I was talking to my mom, my dad, and I was like, microaggression. My dad's like, what? I was like, I know, that was me. I can't remember the first time I heard that word. But I also was like, yeah, and I was explaining it, and he's like, well, why? He's like, that sounds so like almost too specific, right? Like, what is the importance of like calling it? I was like, because Dad, all of these times I've come home from school upset, not because a bully hit me or took my lunch money, but because they said something to me and they didn't even say the word Asian, but context They weren't doing it to any of the other like white kids. And the punchline of the joke was indicative of my physical appearance. I was like, I was just upset all the time. You know, like but now I can say, oh, I was upset because I was being microaggressed. People were taking like racially charged actions against me, and I can talk about it now and I can speak to you about it. And instead of just being like, oh, she just got bullied a lot, like we can bundle that up and be like, we can have a conversation about it. And so I read something somewhere about how language precedes culture. And that is not like a hard and fast rule. Like obviously things happen whether you put a name to it or not, but you can't learn and research and develop concepts without naming it first. Which is why it's so important that like, I mean, my name's really easy to say, but for like ethnic names, like if your father, if the last name, if we're getting like traditionally stuff, it's important. You always want to make it important that they say your name correctly because that's your name. Yeah. That's integral to who you are. It's not just like, you know what I mean? And the same goes for these things that we talk about like race issues, because the better and more precisely we can talk about it. I also think that helps with people that don't understand, because they're like, oh, it's all racist. Well, I'm not racist. And it's like, okay, yeah, maybe you're not, but you have these internal biases. But now we have the language internal biases that we can unpack, and you don't have to burden that guilt of like racist, like slavery, all these things that we associate with the word racism. We can unpack it and realize that there's varying outlets that race issues present themselves in, and without language we can't have those conversations. So as I was doing my research, I just was like really fascinated with the linguistics of it, and it ended up being really helpful when I wrote, because I could afford to get specific, and when I defended, I could explain these terms and talk about why they're important. So
I'd love to hear from you, Marie, about some of the things that you learned through Hannah. And I'm wondering if you had a similar experience where some of the things that you have had experienced kind of having a name were empowering at all, or anything that you thought about what Hannah was bringing to you on a regular basis.
Yeah, she taught me a lot. There's a lot of, like she said, there's a lot of words that we didn't have names for. I mean, things that happened, we didn't have names for. So she has educated her father and I a lot on microaggression and a lot of these other phrases. And it does help to be able to put a word to it so that you can explain, like Hannah said, sometimes it may not necessarily be racist, but it's the little things that to people it's just a joke, or it's not a big deal, but it is to us. Yeah. So
it is.
I think that's really important, because I don't know how many meetings I've been in when people are like, I don't know how to pronounce this and I'm going to botch it. And then the other person is just like, oh, I respond to everything, you know? And I think that has been I think we've all been, that has been reinforced behavior since we were little, which is like, just make yourself smaller and make it convenient for everyone else. Like you're the one who always has to do the shifting. And, you know, I think that is important for sure in terms of the specificity. And really we're robbing them of learning more and taking them out of the ignorance that is the source of that comment in the first place, you know, because I've tried to reframe it in my mind too, because if I was doing something that was hurting someone and they didn't tell me, I would be so upset. And so I think trying to think of it that way, like as being serving people in a way, is a better way to reframe it, at least so that it doesn't feel like so pressure laden.
Yeah.
I think also language validates our experience as well, right? So like I said before, I wasn't crazy that this feeling of being, of hatred towards my identity, like it was real, and there's a term for it. And like Hannah's saying, once we can actually talk about it, we can confront it, so we can educate, inform, especially those that are willing to learn, right? And this is something where I have to kind of figure out. I actually don't like to have these conversations, even with friends, because we're friends based on something else, and I don't want to ruin that friendship on a tense conversation. We don't talk about politics, right? But I think being able to have the language and the words can better prepare those conversations. That can better prepare us for those conversations and articulate it in a way that can be less, I guess, like heightened, intense, and just coming from more of an educative background.
Yeah, and being on the other side, learning from Hannah, it's been freeing for me to have that language and to own those internal biases and to recognize and realize what's going on around me. And I think that's, again, it's that thing. Well, if you do have that honest conversation and it does sever that relationship, well, maybe maybe that relationship was not the one. But sometimes you also need to let people go away and like figure their stuff out, and you may have had an impact on it. Even a very casual, somebody that you may never see again, you could impact them and the way that they think about things. And the other side of in working with women for as long as I have, and things like microaggressions, obviously in the workplace, happen a lot. And one of the things that we talk a lot about is kind of having a script for yourself and how to address some of those more common interactions, right? And one, addressing it, and two, not explaining like that made me feel like this, and I don't have to tell you why, but and so I don't know if you all have had any successful experiences where something has happened to you. I know Hannah's given me a few examples where you just address it, and it's short and sweet and to the point, and it's pointed out, and but anybody could use that comment. So example with women is the difference between hey, I like your necklace, and hey, I like your necklace. and a response to that is the way that you're talking to me right now does not make me feel comfortable. And don't have to explain it. They know or don't know, and that's up to them. And it could be an opportunity for a conversation. But do you all have anything that you've experienced where something like that has worked for you in addressing? Sylvia, you mentioned that you went on Facebook and you were like, and I'm going to get loud and angry because I haven't been loud and angry before. And so people are going to start listening. But in your day-to-day, is there anything that you feel like, you could say in numerous situations that would help you have addressed that and maybe make a difference in that moment?
I can say, with social media, you can hide behind the screen, right? And so as I'm finding my voice, that was an easier entry into advocating. But I can tell you the numerous times that I've ever experienced anything, I've just never said anything. And I've never talked about it. I never confronted it. I never wanted to strain a relationship or make a stranger even feel uncomfortable, right? So it's the people pleasing, constant people pleasing, and just not wanting to cause trouble. And so I unfortunately have never confronted anybody. And what I hope from here, and this is kind of like part of that challenge for my own personal growth, is from here on, I am more open to doing that. But I can tell you, every time I walk into a Walmart, because I'm ready after all this whole pandemic crap, is I've got my phone ready to record if an instance happens, a situation happens, and I'm constantly, before I go into a building, I'm like, if something happens, what am I going to say? I need to have my phone ready at least to record it if I still can't get anything out of my mouth and say something, you know.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's still a challenge. My
Yeah.
strength lies in other areas.
You're finding new strengths.
Yeah.
Marie, you mentioned that you feel like you've had to address this several times in your career, in your life. And I know that you have a lot of different examples. Is there anything that you felt worked better than something else in addressing something when it happens?
Well, the few times that I did address it, as Hannah will be able to tell you, I don't usually hold back. I pretty much tell them like it is. An example is when my younger brother was living in Dallas, and I think he may have still been in college, but he wanted to look for a new car. And my dad told him, go find your car. And dad had the money to do it. So he said, just, we'll pay cash. And he went to a local dealership here, and the guy was hesitant to help him, but he finally, my brother had asked for help. He got someone to help him. But as soon as Caucasian family walked in, just your normal, average American family, husband, wife, little kid, left my brother, wouldn't talk to him anymore. And he came home very upset. So I said, well, we can't have that. We'll just call him. So I called to speak to the manager, and the manager, unfortunately, was very nasty, very ugly. He said, it doesn't matter. We don't need your business. We've got plenty of other people who will buy cars from us, so we don't need your business. I said, okay, that's fine. Just know that I'm not shy, and I will speak to every person I know not to use this dealership, and here is why. There's no need to be buying a car from a racist when there's several other Honda dealerships around. That was it. He hung up after that. So, did it make any difference? I couldn't say. But again, it was, you're not going to treat us like that. And so I just pretty much told him.
Sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen.
Learn from the best. And if dad ever wonders where I got my mouth from, he should look at his wife. Because I also have gotten the conversation. It's like, God bless the man that chooses to marry you. And I'm like, well, look who you married, sir. So that's the blueprint, ladies and gentlemen.
I love
it. I love it. Jeanette, well, how about you?
Oh gosh. I mean, I see it as more, I'm like, it's now responsibility for systems change, because I'm in troubleshooting. I'm like, we've done enough troubleshooting actually, and now it's like, okay, we need to figure this out. And I think that the papers that Hannah is writing, like, that needs to go on Medium. You need to publish it. You need to start putting it out there and let the comments speak for themselves, because I think what I've learned, even what little vulnerability I give myself permission to have, like, I will have someone come up to me. And I'm realizing, like what you said, like, I was uncomfortable when you said, you're like, you're at the top. I don't see that. I don't feel like my identity doesn't catch up with like whatever is on the LinkedIn profile. Like, I still feel like, what's happened? I don't know. Like, still feel, so that has been my challenge. It's like telling people about the Arkansas Asia Business Association, like making sure there's a lot more visibility to resources and ways to talk about personal finance, leadership development, mentorship, making sure there's representation. Like, if I'm ever part of a programmatic discussion, I feel like I have to be that voice of like, have you thought about this? Or have you looked at the design on how this could be leaving people out and unintended consequences? I think and not necessarily but I always come from it as like an inquisitive curiosity standpoint. And if you approach a conversation like that, you're going to be received, I think, a warmer reception, because I'm like, I'm figuring it out at the same time as you. And I think that's the toughest thing, is like knowing, especially living in a world where this is recorded, and like it makes me very uncomfortable to say anything that I know, is going to be recorded forever and be out there, and that we can't edit. And I think that, like, Sylvia, when you hear about when you talked about your mom being like, why did you do that? Like, it's always about, I think I have felt it's like, why do I feel like I'm going to get in trouble? Even if there's not someone who could get me in trouble, I still live with this feeling that, like, am I going to get in trouble? And I'm like, who knows what sort of intersectionality mess has created that, that fear in me. I'm like, when I see a police car, I'm terrified. When I see, I don't know, there are all these things I don't explain. And Hannah, you've got the language. I know there are reasons why these things are triggering. But yeah, I'm just like, it's any moments of solidarity, any tiny human moment of solidarity that we can have in our immediate space or whatever's in our comfort level, I think is now our responsibility. It's our responsibility. And so yeah, I think that what everyone is doing is like what they can do in that moment. And as long as it's incrementally more than you did before, it's awesome. That's sort of where I land on it.
I love that. And when you say it's your responsibility, I just want to say that it's everyone's responsibility. And I love that, you don't want to blend in, and you want to stand out and stand up more. And I'll just say that, I think more I want to stand beside you. So that's just as important in this conversation as anything else. And Debbie is reminding us that you also, in addition to what we're talking about today, you're also living through the prejudice of being a woman. And so intersectional feminism, that will be a different topic for a different day. But I just want to thank you all, because I know that we could talk to you all day long, and I would want to. Unfortunately, we only have limited time today, trying to get everybody in on their lunch hour. So I want to thank you again. I hope that we will continue this conversation. We'll keep talking about and sharing your perspectives and stories through all of these recordings, Jeanette. But also, I want to encourage anybody who has listened today, or is on the webinar, or is watching this later, to continue talking and sharing your own perspectives and stories. Again, you're going to receive a copy of this recording if you're signed up for Next News, which you can find by going to our website, nextwomen.com, nexxtwomen.com, and click join. We also will keep talking via Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and you're always welcome to reach out to us directly at hello@nextwomen.com. Thank you all so much for today. I can't thank you enough. And now I'm gonna go off screen and cry. So thank you. And you're getting lots of thank yous in the comments. And we will talk to you all again very soon.
Thank
you
you
so much. All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.